To prepare our minds for Brother Banning's sermon, please turn your Bibles to 1 Kings 12, and I'll be reading starting at verse 25. First Kings 12, verse 25. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the mountains of Ephraim and dwelt there. Also he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, "Now the kingdom may return to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, Rehoboam, king of Judah. And they will kill me and go back to Rehoboam, king of Judah." Therefore the king asked advice, made 2 calves of gold, and said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Hear your gods, O Israel, which brought you up from the land of Egypt." And he set one up at Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. Now this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one as far as Dan. He made shrines on the high places and made priests from every class of people who were not of the sons of Levi. Jeroboam ordained a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah, and offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did at Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he had made. And at Bethel he installed the priests of the high places which he had made. So he made offerings on the altar which he had made at Bethel on the 15th day of the 8th month, in the month which he had devised in his own heart. And he ordained a feast for the children of Israel, and offered sacrifices on the altar and burned incense.
Great to see everybody this morning. We always are excited when Camper Sunday rolls around. That's what we call it here, and all you guys are passing through on your way to camp. It's a special Sunday for us. Glad you made it safely this morning. Survived the rain, I guess. The good news is, last time I checked the radar, the rain is past us. The bad news is, it's headed east. If you time this just right, you could actually do this storm 3 different times today. I know you're all really excited about that. We're glad you could be with us today. We're going to begin our study in 1 Kings chapter 12, as Trey just read for us. What I'd like to do is I'd like to make 4 observations about the story he just read, and then I'm going to come back and make 4 applications, and we'll be done, and you guys can be back on the road and back in the rain, okay? So I want to begin with this. When we look at this story in 1 Kings chapter 12, the first thing that I want you to notice with me, I don't know why that slide's coming up. How about that one? That's the one I want. First thing I want you to notice with me is Jeroboam is making a decision in a moment of crisis. Do you see that there in the text? I mean, this is a serious crisis. The nation that he is part of has just divided, and it's on the very verge of civil war. And he is the king of the 10 rebel tribes. It's sort of a precarious position, and he's thinking about that. He's especially thinking about what's going to happen when his people start going back down south, back to Jerusalem to worship, and they're going to miss going to Jerusalem, and they're going to feel bad about breaking up the nation, and the text says their hearts will go back to Rehoboam, Solomon's son. They want to get the nation back together, which leaves Jeroboam as kind of the odd man out. And you understand at that time, that just doesn't mean unemployment for him, right? It doesn't just mean he loses his job as king. Listen, when you lost your job as king back then, there's only one way to lose it, basically. To die. Either die naturally or get killed. But when you stopped being king, that's the way it ended for you. And he sees the writing on the wall. He sees that, says that in verse 28. They're going to make Rehoboam their king, or verse 27 rather, and I'm going to die. So he has to do something about that. And he devises this plan to set up a new religion in the north that would keep the people at home and keep them loyal to him. So he's making a decision in a moment of crisis, in the greatest possible crisis. This is kind of a life or death decision. That's the first thing I want you to see. The second thing that I want you to see is this, that to a lot of people, what he did must surely have seemed like no big deal. we think it's a big deal, obviously, because of the way we see God and the way we see Scripture, and we know how all of this comes out. But I want you to go back and try to get in his shoes and see it from his perspective and from the perspective of people living at that time. Listen, he's not turning Israel into a nation of atheists. In fact, I think in setting up the images, you could argue that he's not even turning them to pagan gods, because in verse 28, he sets up the images and he refers to them as the gods that brought you up out of the land of Egypt. What's he saying? Well, I think what he's offering is a new way of worshiping Jehovah. That's really what he's doing. And candidly, in a way that would not be unfamiliar to people at that time. Jeroboam easily could have pointed to the nations around him and said, everybody worships this way, folks. Everybody has images of their God that they worship. And the interesting thing is, what they were doing sort of looked like what they did back in Jerusalem. If you're looking at verse 32, this is 1 Kings 12, verse 32. In fact, back up, verse 31, there were priests. There were sacrifices that were going to be made. Verse 32 tells us there was a feast that was set up. And notice verse 32 said, it was like the feast in Judah. It was just timed a little differently to help out the farmers in the north. So it was convenient in a whole lot of different ways. And so I think a lot of people would look at what Jeroboam did and not just say that it really wasn't a big deal, just a few tweaks to the way we worship Jehovah. I think some would contend it was absolutely necessary. He needed to do this for the unity of his nation. And so I think a lot of people would say, he's in a crisis, and he makes a few changes, no big deal, but here's the thing I want to say. It was a really big deal. And it was a really big deal not just because it violated the law of God. There's a piece of this that is often missed that I think is the most important piece. So here's the third observation I want to make about this story, and that is this. Jeroboam's decision proved that he didn't trust God. And that's the bigger issue. Are you still there in 1 Kings chapter 12? Back up to chapter 11. Just go back one chapter. And I want you to know that all of this business about the nation dividing and Jeroboam becoming a king, that wasn't news to Jeroboam. God had already sent him a prophet and told him that. This is verse 37 of 1 Kings 11. Through the prophet, God says, I will take you and you will reign over whatever you desire, and you shall be king over Israel. God's going to make that happen. But look at what else he says. This is verse 38. Then it will be that if you will listen to all that I command you and walk in my ways and do what is right in my sight by observing all of my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, then I will be with you, and I will build you an enduring house as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. I want you to really think about what God says through the prophet in verse 38. He says, Jeroboam, here's what I want you to do. I want you to be like David. I want you to obey me. I want you to do what I tell you to do. I want you to follow my commandments. And here's the deal. If you will do that, I will not only make you king, but did you see it at the end of verse 38? What did he promise to build for you? An enduring house like David. What does that mean? People aren't going back to Judah. People aren't going to change their mind about having you king. They're not going to go back to the temple and get all homesick for Jerusalem and worshiping there and change their minds about having you as a king. How do you know that? Because God said so. I will build for you an enduring house. What you're worried about will not happen if you will just do what I said. So the real issue here is not about how he tweaked the old religion. The real issue is, would he trust God? Would he believe that God would do what he said? And the answer is no. He didn't trust God. And he came up with a plan of his own that led his people into sin. In fact, the last thing I want you to notice about this story is that ultimately it led millions of people into sin. And the text talks about that. So I want you to jump ahead to 1 Kings 15 now. And I want you to notice something else we find out about this decision Jeroboam made. I'm going to chapter 15, and I'm headed down to verse 25. Are you looking at that? Because in verse 25, Jeroboam dies, because remember, that's the only way to get out of being king. And his son Nadab becomes king in his place. But look at verse 26. It says, he did evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of his father, and in his sin which he made Israel to sin. Do you see that? So after Jeroboam, his son comes to the throne, and his son continues this foolish decision his father had made. This false worship continues. But do you realize that's not the only time we see that? So I'm jumping ahead to chapter 16. Will you turn over a page or two? This is 1 Kings 16. Verse 1, Baasha becomes king. And if you look at verse 2, it says of Baasha that he walked in the way of Jeroboam and have made my people Israel sin, provoking me to anger with their sin. So Baasha does the same thing. Jump ahead to verse 18 of chapter 16. Zimri becomes king, and what does verse 19 say of him? That he walked in the way of Jeroboam. Then verse 25 of the same text, Omri becomes king, and what does verse 26 say about him? He walked in the way of Jeroboam. Do you see what's happening? This sin that Jeroboam began when he made this decision at a moment of crisis and didn't trust God, this sin that he instigated, king after king after king, continues it, perpetuates it, leads the people to continue in the idolatry. In fact, if you'll jump ahead now to 2 Kings, I want to go all the way to the end of the northern nation's history. In 2 Kings 17, we're given the end of their story. And in this chapter, the writer is explaining why the northern nation of Israel fell. Look at verse 21. This is 2 Kings 17:21. When he, that is God, had torn Israel from the house of David, they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king. Remember, that's looking back at that passage just read for us in 1 Kings 12. Then Jeroboam drove Israel away from following the Lord and made them commit a great sin. The sons of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did, and did not depart from them until, verse 23 says, God removed Israel from his side. Generation after generation continued in Jeroboam's sin until ultimately God had had enough and he just took the nation away into captivity. Why? Because of the sin of Jeroboam. Now I want you to understand that every Israelite was accountable for their choice to be involved in this false worship, okay? I'm not saying it's Jeroboam's fault that they sinned, because they could have made a choice not to go along with this, and yet they did. But I do want you to see that in this moment of crisis, Jeroboam didn't trust God. And as a result of that, became an instigator of this terrible sin, and ultimately millions of people followed him into it. That's kind of a terrible story, isn't it? Someone says, yeah, couldn't you have thought of something a little more upbeat to talk about today? So I want to make 4 applications of this story. What does it say to me and you? What does it say to me and you about our decisions? Well, think about this. Number 1, I think we do have to make decisions all the time, every day at moments of crisis. In fact, I put on the slide there that all the time, every day, we are all experiencing our little moments of crisis. Maybe not like Jeroboam. It may be that you will never be the king of a nation on the verge of civil war and you got to start making decisions about worship. That will probably never happen to you. But I promise you that today, you and I are going to have our little moments of crisis where I've got to decide, am I going to do what God wants me to do? Or am I going to do my own thing? When your parents say, I don't want you hanging out with that crowd of kids. They're a bad influence on you. When you go off to college, any seniors in the crowd? Graduated seniors, not incoming seniors? Yes. Going off to college next year? You know what's going to happen in August? You're going to wake up on Sunday morning and realize your mama's not there. And you don't have to go. Now, I warn you about that. She's got people watching you. She'll find out. And you'll have to decide, am I going to go today? When you're at a party and somebody hands you a beer. When a teacher walks out of the classroom and your buddy leans over and says, I need to answer for number 8. And that guy you've been dating for 6 months says to you, this relationship's going to go on. We've got to start having sex. When a little white lie would seem to save us a world of grief, you'll have your moment. Your moment of crisis where you have to decide. Now, here's the other thing I want you to know about that. Second thing I want to say is this, that the world is going to say that to choose sin in those settings is really no big deal. I want you to understand that the mantra of your generation is, sin is no big deal. People are going to tell you that all the time. It really doesn't matter that much whether you choose to do right or whether you choose to do wrong. They're going to say things like, it's just one beer. It's just one answer on a test. Or, it's just a homework assignment. Let me copy, because that's not even really cheating. Right, Ashley? I've told kids, I said, listen, if copying homework isn't cheating, all I ask you to do is write at the bottom, I'm putting my name on this, but you need to understand, I got all my answers from my friend. I haven't had a kid take me up on that yet. Oh, I think somebody knows something. It's just homework. It's just one service. Just going to miss this once. And it's just singing night at that. We don't have to go all the way. Or it's just sex. Or it'll just be this one time. The world is going to tell you that it's no big deal. Here's what I want to say to you. Every time we choose to do what God doesn't want us to do, it's a big deal. Because it says something about my trust in Him. You see that? Going back to Jeroboam, remember that the bigger issue there was not the way he was setting up and tweaking this new religion he put together. Yeah, that was a problem. That was a violation of the law. But the bigger problem he had is that God had told him, you do the right thing and I'll build for you an enduring house. He didn't trust God. That was the deal. Do you understand that's the same thing when you and I choose to do wrong? Besides whatever the wrong is and the implications and trouble that may come from that, every time I know what God says, I choose to do something different, what I'm really saying is, I don't trust you. Think about it. Isn't that so? When I choose to not follow His path for me, what I'm saying is, I don't really believe that path is right. And because I'm not willing to take your path, what that means is I don't really, in the deep recesses of my heart, believe that you're really showing me the best way to go, the right way to go. In fact, you know what it really says? It really says that I don't believe you love me. Someone says, no, that's not what I'm thinking. Process it. Because love means God always acts in our best interest. And when I don't take His path, that means that I don't believe that He has my best interest in mind. Is that where I'm at? Every choice to sin is a big deal because of what it says about my relationship with God, what it says about me and Him. Someone hears that and says, well, so maybe I don't always make the choice to do the right thing. What's the big deal? It's not like I'm Jeroboam. It's not like I'm a king of a whole empire and that I'm going to lead lots of other people in sin. Come on, David, I'm 15 years old. I just finished my freshman year. There are like 6 people, including teachers, who know me at my high school. Who am I? Who's going to be influenced by my decisions? Well, let's think about that before we're done this morning. Who are you? And what impact will you have on other people? Maybe you look at yourself like that little circle on the slide. I'm just this one person who doesn't really touch the life of anyone else. But I want you to imagine, I put an S in that circle because that represents a person who chooses to be saved, who chooses to walk with Jesus. So let's imagine that's your choice. I am going to walk with Jesus. Question, who will be impacted by that choice? Who will you influence over the course of your life? Do you think if you choose to walk with Jesus, it's likely that you will end up married to someone who walks with Jesus? I know it didn't work out that way 100% of the time, but probabilities. What will probably happen? I have found that when a person decides, I want to serve Jesus, I want to be a saved person, they usually wind up partnering life with another saved person. And you know what? Those two saved people help each other. You buy that? So you are going to have influence over another person. You get married? Spouse is going to influence you. You're going to influence them. Question, you going to have any kids? Well, if you're an average American, you have 2.5. So I put 3 on the slide. Just don't like working with halves. It's kind of awkward. And if mom and dad love the Lord, do you think that's going to impact these 3 kids they have? I know this isn't guaranteed, okay? Kids can be taught the right things and made another choice. But I will tell you, the likelihood is that if kids have the love of God laid up on their heart, they're probably going to love God too. See, you're having impact on your spouse and on your children. And if they really love the Lord, you think they'll probably end up partnered in life with someone else that loves the Lord? And then they start having kids. Now we're up to your grandchildren. My daughter-in-law made me a granddad 3 weeks ago. And I'm hoping that's what they're going to do for Ellison, that they're going to partner together and help her come to know and serve the Lord. And so if that happens, you think they'll end up with partnered in someone in life that loves Jesus, and then they're going to start having kids? Those are your great-grandchildren down there. If you live up to see your great-grandchildren, you have done very, very well. But that is the bottom of the slide because most folks are not going beyond that, okay? Someone says, that's a lot of people. You realize I've left a bunch off. Wesley, if you're a good disciple and you're committed to serve Jesus, what are you going to do? Tell other people about Jesus. And let's say you're pretty lame and don't do a lot of that like you should. But over the course of your life, maybe you influence 3 other people to follow Jesus. Ought to do a lot better than that. And I can tell you what's happened in our church family. We've had some folks who've shared the gospel with their friends, co-workers, and you know what those co-workers do? They take the gospel and they share it with their spouse and they share it with their children, and their children wind up married to disciples and they start having kids and sharing Christ with them. I want you to know something. For me, this is not hypothetical. This is my mom and dad. They grew up in a home where their parents did not serve Jesus, and they decided that they would. And they taught my sister, I left one of my sisters off, that wasn't a personal thing. But they taught us to serve Jesus, and we all wound up married to people who serve Jesus and have kids, and almost all of them are serving Jesus. And like I said, Saturday I became a grandpa. I should have put a picture up, Max. But that would just make y'all envious of my precious granddaughter if I did that. But what I'm trying to say to you, this isn't hypothetically what might happen. For me, this is what happened. This is my family. Started with my mom and dad. You can change the world. At least your little corner of it. Don't misunderstand. I know that we can't determine how things are going to turn out with someone else. Everybody has to ultimately make their choice about walking with Jesus or not. But I am going to say this. We influence other people. We influence lots of other people. Your choice really does matter. And so what happens if you make the wrong choice? Now how many will be influenced? I'll tell you, folks, there's more to a man than his physical body. We have a soul that continues on forever. And think about it. We have this awesome capacity to impact and influence where people in our circle will spend eternity. It begins with my choice. The decision I'll make to walk with Jesus or not. Have you made your choice? We're going to sing a song that celebrates that wonderful day that's coming. We hope that you will make a choice to walk with Jesus. If you have not done that, we want to sing this song as a way to encourage you to make a decision to serve Jesus, whether making that for the very first time or rededicating your life to serving Him. He is eager and ready to see you come home. Would you come back to Him? If you need to do that, make your way to the front right now while we stand, while we sing.